Hey everybody, welcome to our virtual ornament painting party. I'm gonna give it a couple minutes and let some people get on. Sorry, we're a little bit late. Of course, I forgot my password before logging into all my stuff. And I'm gonna go ahead and get everything set up and then just say hi as you're jumping in. I'm gonna do one of each type of ornament tonight. So when you hop on here, just give me your vote of which type of ornament you would like me to start with. If you wanna see the slices first, just say slices. If you wanna see the bars, say bars. If you wanna see the gnomes, give me your vote down below. I'm gonna get everything pulled up on my computer here, make sure everything's working good. But again, when you're jumping in, give me your vote so I know that you're here. Which one do you want to see me paint first? The slices, the bars, or the gnomes? All right, looks like everything's working good. Hey, Nicole. All right, I'm gonna make sure my computer's up so I can watch for questions that are rolling in. Okay, and then before we get into it too, there's just a couple things that you are probably gonna want that were maybe not necessarily included with your kit. Definitely a hot glue gun if you're doing the gnomes. Those are gonna need glue in order for the fur to stick for the beards. So if you don't have a hot glue gun, you can just kind of paint with me up until that part. And then once you get to that part, leave that for another day. And then the other thing you might want is some extra paper towels. I have a whole roll handy here just because if you're using these for dusting and doing different colors and different things, it can get a little messy sometimes. So if you have just some regular paper towels or even for the waxing and all those steps, if you've got like some old socks or different things, those work really great for this too. You're also gonna want some scissors. Scissors are gonna be great for cutting apart your stencils for the bars. So scissors, you're gonna want some extra paper towels, all kinds of different things. Hi guys, if you're watching, let me know which ornament you would like to see me start with. So far, it looks like slices are winning. They all roughly take about the same amount of time. The gnomes might be a little quicker than the other ones just because there's a lot less paint to be waiting for to dry. But they all roughly take about the same amount of time. So if there's one that you're wanting to start with, let me know. So again, you're gonna want some paper towels, some scissors, all the things that were included with your kit. There's different kinds of brushes for each project. Sandpaper, paint, all that good stuff. All right. Hi guys, if you're hopping in, tell me your vote. Which ornament do you want to see first? That way I'm making sure that I'm helping the most amount of people possible. So tell me which one you want to start with, slices, bars, or gnomes. I'm gonna grab a couple paint cups real quick for my colors. That way I'm not making a big old mess. All right. We got some more bars, slices. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and start with the slices since those seem to be the most popular. So the slices are gonna be the round wood slices just like this. I'm just gonna do one tonight because it's the same process for all the different pieces and stencils. And I am gonna do, there's my sample one. I'm gonna do the Let It Snow. That's the design that I picked for my sample. So these stencils should already be cut apart in your bag for you. What you also have in your bag is some foam brushes for the stenciling, some regular brushes for painting the base coat on there. You should have some twine pieces for attaching a little hanger. Now with the slices, I'm gonna go ahead and sit down here. One thing you're gonna wanna watch out for is that these do naturally kind of split if they haven't been given enough time to dry. That happens. So if your slices do end up splitting, or if it's split already, what you can do is you can take a little bit of glue, and if you have, or even if you had like some wood putty, or a little hack I saw somebody use the other day was some regular glue mixed with some flour, and you're gonna make like a paste with it. And then you're gonna fill in the cracked part of your slice. So that's just something to keep in mind if you have a slice that's a little bit cracked. It's normal, it happens. It's just from not having enough time, and as it's drying out, the moisture is kind of leaving in there. So since I'm doing the Let It Snow, I'm gonna be using the Midnight Sky, which is like a nice navy blue. This is also the same color that we used on our gnome sample. This is gonna be way more than enough than I need to do this. This would probably get me like almost a whole set of ornaments out of this. So just so you know, that's gonna be a lot of paint. You're gonna wanna use your regular brush, and all we're gonna do is we're gonna put a nice base on here, kind of taking it all the way to the edges where the bark of the wood is. Just filling that in the best we can. If you want to completely cover this, you can. Just know that that bark is gonna stay a little bit brown. And I'm not gonna do any paint down in that little hole in there. I'll just get what's kind of falling down in there. If you have any questions as we're working on these, just let me know. I'm gonna try and go fairly quick. That way you guys aren't on here all night. But that way anybody watching for the replay, I know sometimes it's kind of annoying if you're watching on the replay and there's lots of time taken up from saying hello and all that kind of stuff. So just know this was recorded live on Facebook. All right, so we're just rounding out around the edges. If you're watching and you scored a great deal on something today, other than something you shopped with us, let me know. I still have not even had time to take a look at what's out there. If you got a great deal today somewhere, let me know. Especially if it's another local shop. That would be great. I would love to shop local this year. All right, so I'm just making sure that this color is nice and even. Now, if you wanted a really rich color, or maybe you're doing like a light color like white or off-white, you might want to let this dry and then do a second coat. I'm really liking the way that this is looking so far. So I think I'm probably just going to stick with the one, but I'm going to brush this out as much as I can so it dries pretty quickly. Again, I'm taking it just right up to the edge here, not into the bark. Get as much of that wet paint brushed in as I can. All the way to the edge there. All right, there we go. So now all we need to do is let that dry to the touch. And then we'll be able to just kind of sand it gently and apply that stencil. I'm gonna go ahead and get this shared in a couple spots. That way, if you purchased a kit today, you'll be able to watch the video. All right. Okay, so we need to make sure that this is totally dry before we sand it. So what we're gonna do next is we're just gonna very lightly sand it. That way everything's still nice and smooth. So when we lay our stencil down, it's gonna stick to it really well. The nice thing about these is that they're double-sided. So you could always do our stencils on one side and then you could flip it over and either do a separate color. You could even paint a little pattern on the back. You could do double-sided ornaments and that would be really cute too. Now for this Let It Snow, I am just gonna be using white for all of the lettering over the top. Just regular. There we go. So again, we just need this pretty well dry to the touch. The stencil is not gonna wanna lay flat if it's not dry. So if you're touching it and it seems like there's color coming off on your fingers, that means you just need to wait a little bit. So you could even set up a little assembly line for these. Start with one, move down the row. By the time you get back up to the top one, you'll probably be ready to go for cleaning that out. The nice thing about these brushes too is that you can use this brush for all the different types of ornaments. We tried to, as much as we could, use the same materials in all of them. That way you'd have a little bit of crossover. So if you need a few more brushes in a different type, you can do that. I'm just gonna kind of rinse this brush off for when I need it for the next step. That's feeling pretty close. So for sanding this down before we put on the stencil, we're gonna use the fine grit, which is really light. And you're just gonna very lightly sand over the top. And then we're gonna use a rag to wipe off the dust. The main thing with these is that we don't want them to feel too cold to the touch. So sometimes, even if it doesn't look shiny or there's no color coming off, if it feels a little cold, that's how you know that it's still a little bit too wet. This one's feeling pretty good. It's pretty close. This paint dries pretty quickly. So the next thing you're gonna wanna do is choose your stencil, whichever stencil you wanna apply to it. And then I am grabbing one of our squeegees. A straight edge works great for pressing the stencil down really well. That way you can make sure that it's stuck to your slice really good. You can also use like a credit card or a library card or something that's got a nice straight edge on it. That way you can press that stencil down really well. Some of these shapes too are gonna be like, they're not all perfect circles. That's just the way that wood goes. We tried to pick out the best ones we could, but sometimes it's tough to find ones that are absolutely perfect. So what you're gonna wanna do is get a little creative and kind of watch where the stencil's laying when you're positioning this on here. What we're gonna do first is we're gonna flip it over. We're gonna roll off this white paper backing. And as you're rolling off this white backing, you don't wanna see anything blue coming off. That means you'd be losing an inside piece of your letter. Same as when you do our normal sign projects with us, all this blue stuff needs to stay stuck in the design. So we don't want any of that to come out. So once you get that white piece off, just check to make sure that you didn't lose anything. We're gonna go ahead and flip this over. The nice thing about this is you'll be able to kind of see where those letters are gonna fall. So I wanna bump this down because right here, the top of my T is gonna go right where that hole is for the string. So I'm gonna position it down a little closer to the bottom. That way all my letters are on there really well and I don't have to worry about anything getting covered up. So I kind of moved it down closer towards the bottom edge here. Now I'm gonna take my scraper and I'm gonna very carefully kind of push this on. I'm pushing pretty hard, but I'm moving really slow. That way it doesn't shift across. So really carefully. Once you got that pressed on, now we're gonna roll off the clear tape. So this is where you're gonna be able to tell if it was still a little bit too wet or not. If your piece was a little bit wet, you're gonna run into some problems with things trying to pop off of your design. Worst thing that's gonna happen is your stencil is gonna be a little bit fuzzy, which is not the end of the world, especially on these little tiny pieces, it'll be okay. So we just wanna make sure that everything blue stays stuck down and we're gonna press it down really good. Sometimes it's easier to just kind of press with your fingers on these small pieces. So again, with this step, nothing blue coming off on the clear tape. Everything blue should be stuck to the slice right now. See, I've got this little part right here. That one is trying to pop up. That tells me that blue paint was still a little bit too wet down there. That's okay, I'm going a little bit faster than I would normally go just for the video. So I'm gonna make sure that when I get to that spot that I paint really, really carefully. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take my foam brush with a little bit of my stencil paint. So I'm just gonna do the simplicity over the whole design. And I'm gonna very, very lightly start sweeping that over. So this spot here where it was lifting up, I'm gonna make sure I go with that rather than against it. So I'm just kind of covering the whole design here. So now if you are gonna do yours where different words are gonna be different colors, you're just gonna wanna go really, really carefully. You might even find it to be a little bit easier to use your regular brush, your flat brush when you're doing that. You really wanna be careful with those because it's easy to get too much paint on there. Before you know it, you're just kind of covering it and it's easy to have too much, which again, worst thing that's gonna happen is it's gonna bleed a little bit. So we're gonna do a couple coats like this, just very lightly sweeping the paint. This is gonna help the stencil kind of lay down flat and build a good foundation so that every additional coat we can go just a little bit thicker. We wanna make sure that we completely cover this and we get paint all the way to the edges. All the way to the edges of the letters. Just keep an eye on your actual slice. Like if you have any of that bark that's exposed up at the top, you wanna make sure that you don't get too much paint up there. So then we're just gonna let this dry to the touch. With that first coat, it's gonna dry really quickly because it's so thin. You wanna make sure that you don't put the second coat on too fast though, because that's where it can start to bleed underneath too. Usually it takes 3 coats of every color to get it to look great. Sometimes though, like if you're going for the rustic look, you can get away with just 2. So I'll probably do 2 coats in one spot and then 3 coats in another, just so you can kind of see. So because this is so small right here, I am just pressing a little bit just to get a little bit more paint off my brush. Just want to be really careful. You don't have to be as careful on the bar ornaments as you do on these slices, just because these ones are pretty detailed. All right, so there's coat number 2. We're gonna let that dry for a minute or so. We're gonna need our wax and our rag coming up next after we get the stencil off and everything's dry. Depending on how this looks, I might do just a little bit of a sanding over it to kind of smooth everything out. So this part up here, I'm gonna do a 3rd coat on Let, and I'll stick with just 2 coats on Snow, just so you can kind of see the difference of what it looks like, 1 versus 2 coats. There we go, making sure we got it all covered. All right, so that's 3 up at the top up there, 2 on the bottom. The other thing you might want is you probably got a brush that's got like a skinny tip on it. That's gonna be really good if you end up with some spots that have a little bit of bleeding. After we sand it, we can go in and kind of touch those up a little bit if that happens. Sometimes it happens and it's totally okay. I'm gonna go ahead and lift this main circle piece off of here. All right, it's looking pretty good. I love those little snowflakes. And then you might find that it's easy to use something kind of pokey, like a toothpick. I usually use my fingernails. You've got like a good strong fingernail to lift these little vinyl pieces off of here. You just don't want to gouge too much of the wood. We don't want to gouge the letters or the color underneath, but we do want to make sure that we get all of this vinyl off. if you end up gouging. That's okay, especially if you're gonna rough it up, make it look rustic. There we go. So you can see this part is just a little bit lighter on the white. You can see some of the blue still showing through down here. This is more of like a stark contrast between the white and the blue. I've got a little bit of bleeding down here just because that little peak lifted up a little bit. Not anything that's really gonna bother me. Once I sand it down a little bit and then put some wax over it and hang it on my tree and it's kind of at a distance, that's gonna be a-okay with me. So we just want to make sure that everything is dry to the touch before we move on to sanding it. Otherwise, it's going to smear your paint across. That snowflake right there is still just a little bit wet. So the only reason you would need to sand this is if you want to distress it a little. And what that does, it's going to take your white down just a little bit. You're gonna see some more of that blue starting to show through. This is probably gonna pick up the rings, the natural rings that are happening in the wood. So this is just if you want that kind of rustic distressed look. So I'll just do part of it. And then you can kind of see the difference too, like once it's waxed and everything. A lot of times, especially if you're using like white and red, it's better not to sand it because the dust from those colors can kind of bleed a little bit. Yeah, so you see this part over here is nice and stark. This part looks just a little bit vintage, like it's been hanging on the tree for a while. You're gonna need just a smidge of wax on your towel, just a very tiny little bit. And we're just gonna rub that in over the surface of your ornament of what's been painted. Let it snow. All right. Yeah, so you can see that's what it looks like if you sand it. You're gonna get that kind of rustic vintage look. If you don't sand it, leave it nice and stark, it'll look like that. So this one, compared to this one doesn't have any sanding on it. That one's just straight up paint. We left it as is with the white and the red. So that's kind of the difference between the two of those. Should have a little piece of twine that you can string through there. You can use any kind of twine or string that you like for these. We tried to give everybody kind of the basics of what we thought would work. Tie a little knot in the top. There we go. Ready to hang. All right. So that is the step for the slice, the ornament slices. I'm gonna leave that one up here. If you have any questions about that, just let me know. I'm gonna leave that one up at the top there while we're working. And it looked like the bars were the second most popular. So I'm gonna do those next. So with those, you're gonna have 8 of these little wood bars, little wood chunks. You're gonna have a sheet of stencils as well. On my sample one, I did Noel, so I think I'm gonna do Mary. I'll do Mary on this one. So I'm gonna go ahead and use my scissors and cut that one off the sheet. And I'm gonna just recreate the same look. Seemed like there were a lot of people who liked the look of this with the distressing. So this is also kind of the same as our regular sign tutorial. So we started with a dark base coat and then we went with the lighter color over the top, which is gonna be white for me in this demo, and then the red paint for the letters over the top as well. So really any dark color will work. Like if you just have navy or if you have one of the dark greens, those are gonna be great. I'm gonna be using dark roast, which is a dark brown. You could use black, gray, really anything that's got kind of that dark tone to it. You're gonna want one of your foam brushes. And what we're gonna do first, with a little bit of that dark paint, is we're gonna sweep on a super, super thin coat. So we want it to kind of look like stain. We don't want it to be super solid. So just a little bit just like that. That way it's kind of looking like wood stain versus paint. Now you don't have to do the whole thing. If you don't want to, you don't have to do the back. This one we did just a little bit. You could always just leave that distressing on the front. I'll probably do the edges, but I don't think I'm gonna do the back on this one, just for the sake of time. So again, we're just sweeping this on nice and thin. If you guys are just tuning in, tell me the best deal that you got today for Black Friday. I need to take a look at some things. So if you found a good deal on something somewhere, let me know. I need to do some shopping. Local shopping would be great. All right, so we're just sweeping this on. And then on these rough cut edges, I'm just pressing it in. It's not gonna look like stain on those spots. That is okay. We just want it to be nice and thin. And then to help this dry a little bit better, I'm gonna use a clean part of my rag. Cut a little piece off here. And then I'm just gonna take this bar and I'm gonna kind of rub this on here. That way it'll pick up any of that excess wet paint. There we go. So that's feeling nice and dry. That's perfect. All right. So now that we've got the base coat done, we're gonna use our chip brush and we're gonna brush on a thin coat of white. And I'm gonna leave a little bit of the brown showing through around the edges. We're gonna do the sides as well. And then once everything's dry on the front, I'll probably flip this over and just do the white on the back without any of the brown. So if you're not sure if you want to have that kind of rustic look, go a little bit more solid on the top of your bar, the face of your bar where your stencil is gonna be, because you can always sand some of it off later on. But if you're gonna want like a nice stark white or whatever color you're using, a nice solid color for getting that to show up, just go ahead and brush a little bit on there. So I'm probably gonna let that sit for a minute and then I'll brush a little bit more on. I'm gonna be using Paint the Town for my lettering. Now this one we did just a hint of the Devotion, which is more of like a brighter red kind of mixed in with here. This one I'm gonna do just the Paint the Town, so you can kind of see the difference between both of those. And then I'm gonna brush just a little bit more on here. That way it's a little bit more solid. Let this dry and then I'm gonna rough it up a little bit. So I want it to look vintage, I want it to look distressed. But if you are not into the distressed look, just make sure that your color's nice and solid on there so you don't have to worry about too much of that paint going through. All right, so we're gonna let this dry. So if you didn't get a chance to stop in and grab one of the packs today, you can still pre-order one of the packs for next week. I put the link up at the top of the video. We do have some of the kits left over, so what we're gonna do is, since we've got people waiting for those on the pre-order, we are going to start filling some of those pre-orders now. So if you were one of the first to order earlier this week, you're probably gonna get an email tomorrow saying that your ornament packs are ready. So just kind of watch for that to come through. If you didn't get a chance, again, up at the top, and I'll put that in the comments too. Type that right in here so you guys can see. You have to scroll down just a little bit to get to those packs on there. But we've got all three on there, the gnomes, the slices, and the wood bars. So you can pre-order those for next week. We also have the succulent trees as a pre-order. Waiting on some of those wood flowers to come in still. And then the holiday centerpieces. There we go. All right, so same with this one. We just need this to be totally dry so that we can sand it lightly just a little bit. This is probably gonna take a few minutes for this to dry. So I might even switch over and do the gnome while we're waiting on this one to dry, just because it's got a few coats of paint on there and we can kind of get that gnome started while we're waiting for that. So I'm gonna set that one up there. All right, so this is our sample gnome. He's real cute. He's got green and navy on him. So I know there were a few people that wanted to do the Grinch gnome. So I can show you how to do that one tonight too. That one's gonna be pretty easy. We're just gonna do red, and I think maybe a little bit of white for like a Santa hat on that one. But mostly just red for the top. And then I'll do a regular gnome too. I'll do 2 of those as we're going. That way you can kind of have that regular tutorial. So I'll just recreate this same look if you're wanting to do that. And then we can do our gnome that's a little Grinchy. So what you're gonna do first is you just need to kind of decide like how far up you want the hat to start. These ones, I'm gonna bring them down just a little bit lower. That way I have the right amount of space, because the pieces for the beards are about 2 inches wide. So, like right there, that's gonna be perfect. So I'm gonna bring this down maybe just a little bit lower than halfway. So I'm gonna use that same navy that I used on the sample one. We're just gonna kind of draw a line across there. You don't have to worry about this being exact because it's gonna get covered up with the fur. So as long as it's kind of close all the way around, that'll be perfect. So we're gonna bring this line right across here. So we're just using one of these regular brushes, small brush, to do a nice coat. I know my gnome's not so pretty. We pulled out the not so pretty ones for me to do as my samples tonight. But he's gonna look great by the end of it. We're gonna spiff him up. He's gonna be real good. So again, we're gonna draw a line across here. This rough cut side's gonna take a little bit more paint than the smooth sides will. Just a nice thin coat. And then we're just gonna connect that line all the way across here. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. All right. There we go. So I'm just gonna stand him up to dry for a minute and see how that navy starts doing. And then for our Grinch gnome, we're gonna do some red for him. That way he's got like a little Santa hat on. So same thing, I'm gonna kind of start down here. Brush this up. So some of these colors, depending on how dark you want them to be, you're probably gonna have to do a few coats, maybe 2 or 3. Red is one of those that always needs a couple of coats. So probably gonna need a coat or 2 of this. It's looking pretty good on the edges here. And then the alternative to this is more of like a barn red. You could also do the Devotion, which is that really bright red. One thing I've learned is that everybody's got their own version of Christmas red, the red that you like best. I like a red that's a little more muted. Some people like red it's a little more vibrant. That is okay. whatever you like best. We're just gonna cover him right up. All right, one more side. Okay, get him nice and coated. All right, and we'll let him dry for the time being. I'm gonna check out my navy again. So you can see kind of how this is drying. You probably want a second coat on this one. I'm just gonna do a second coat just on the front, but in a perfect world, we'll do some on the edges. I would go in and do a coat on everything. For the sake of time, I'll just do just the front. And a little more on the edge. All right, and then I'm gonna use Fireworks Green as the base for him. I'm gonna rinse my brush off. And so now what we're gonna do is we're just gonna paint the green here at the bottom and just kind of take it up to meet where that blue line starts. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. So all this is doing is kind of creating the effect of a hat and then like his body down below. A lot of this though is gonna get covered up by the fur. So you can see like on the front, you can barely see any of that green, mostly just on the edges and the back. So don't worry too much about getting that perfect. We just want to do it the best we can so that it gives that effect. And same thing. Just going to kind of follow along that line that we already started with the blue. And same thing on the edge. All right, now for the Grinch, I was looking up pictures of Grinch gnomes online. Try and see the colors that people are using, which really, because you're not gonna see too much of his body, you could really just do green. The only thing with that is that you're gonna see a little bit on the back of it. So I might do a little green for him right on the front. That way when we put this on, if it doesn't completely cover, we'll still have some of that green in there. And then I'll probably just do red around the sides of that one. So there's this green. Let me show you this other one. There's also, this is Rustic Charm. So this is a little bit closer to the Grinchy green. This is the color that we're gonna use for his nose too, because he's got a green Grinchy nose. And then you could, if you wanted, do like a white kind of stripe for like the fur on a Santa hat. You could do that. If you've got some white paint left over, that would be cute. I'll probably do a little white up at the top. Make it look like there's a little puffball on the top of his hat. But this is just kind of a starting point. I was watching Bob Ross earlier and that's his thing. He's like, you do whatever you want. If there's trees in your painting, that's great. That's kind of how I feel about this. If you want to do the whole thing red, you go for it. And then send me a picture because I want to see how it turns out afterwards. We'll do some red on the sides. And I'll just do some red on the back. Make it easy on myself. There we go. Little bit more. All right, so let's see how this guy's drying. close, he's getting there. Getting there. So these ones need to dry a little bit more so that we can sand them a little bit. Here, I'll do the bottom of this one. We're gonna sand them lightly if you wanna rough it up. We're gonna wax them, and then all we have to do is glue on the gnome pieces. And those ones will be ready to go. And so then if you're doing the regular gnome, like on ours, we did not paint the nose, we just left it as is. If you're doing the Grinch, those really look best, the ones that I've seen where the nose is painted just that kind of light green. That way it kind of matches with the fur. So if you think about the Grinch, most likely he would have that kind of green, Grinchy nose. So any shade of green is gonna work good. If you only have this green with your kit, if you have white, just put a little dab of white in there. Just as long as you can get it kind of as close to that fur as possible. I'm just doing the best I can with these without completely covering my fingers in paint. Probably have to go in and paint it a little bit better once I get it on there. But this is just one coat. It's gonna be perfect for this, so. Oh yeah, very Grinchy. Looking great. All right, so we're gonna set that off to the side. And it's looking like our bar is pretty well dry. I'm gonna give myself a fresh piece of paper to work on. Yep, that is feeling great. All right, so we are just gonna lightly sand this. So once that dries, if you're feeling like you want it a little more solid, you definitely can brush a little bit more paint on there. It just needs to be totally dry before the stencil goes on. So I'm just roughing that up a little bit. You can see that I took the paint off a little around the edges and kind of gave it that vintage look. That way I don't have to do as much sanding later on. And then we just want to wipe as much dust off as we can. And we're going to take our stencil, and it's the same as with the slices. We're going to flip this over. We're gonna roll off this white paper backing. We're gonna take our word and we're gonna flip it over. Just kind of line it up the best you can. I'm gonna use this top line up here to kind of be my guide along the top there. That looks great. Press it down really good with our straight edge. These ones are gonna be a little easier than those slices. And then we're gonna roll the clear tape off the top. There we go, nice and flat. All right, and then we're gonna be ready for our foam brush. Grab a clean one. And again, this is the Paint the Town Red. Very, very thin first coat. So just kind of keep an eye if your stencil doesn't go all the way across your piece of wood. You just want to make sure that you keep your paint inside the blue area. That way we don't get any outside of there on the actual piece of wood itself. Same thing, we're going to let that dry to the touch. We are going to do another coat. Once it feels dry, hard to tell now if paint's coming off because my fingers are so dirty. Feeling pretty good. Red is one of those colors, I might have mentioned this earlier, but red's one of those colors that usually needs like 4 coats of paint to dry true to color. So usually 3 is the magic number. This case, 4 might be our magic number. The other things that you're gonna need for this one are some eye hooks. And then we've got twine pieces again that came with these. And then little ribbon pieces, which we use to kind of cover up that eye hook. Depending on the size of those, you might need a bigger piece ribbon just because they're kind of all different sizes based on what we could get. And then we're going to remove this next. Sand it lightly if you want to rough it up a little bit. So this one's not distressed over the letters, so I will show you what this one looks like distressed. We'll wax it, and then we're going to put the eye hook in the top, and then we'll attach the twine and the ribbon once we have that in there. letting this dry a little bit. Just nice and light. Sweeping that on. This is usually the part where people ask, like, maybe we should use a hair dryer. And the reason you don't want to use a hair dryer when you're using stencils like these is because it will actually kind of bake the vinyl onto the board. The stickiness that's on the back of the hair dryer, even on low heat, that's going to kind of start to react with the paint that's on there. It's kind of like if you are stenciling boards out in the sun and it bakes the vinyl on. When you go to pull it off, you're going to end up with all the little sticky pieces stuck in your paint. We don't want that. We want to make sure that it dries really nice and flat. So a ceiling fan is great if you're painting like in a dining room or maybe in your living room and you have a ceiling fan that you can turn on. That's going to be your best bet. You're definitely not going to want to use your hair dryer to speed these up. As much as it seems like it's speeding this up, it's actually causing a little more damage than it is helping. So air drying on these is going to be your best bet, or some kind of fan will be perfect. I'm just going to brush this out a little bit more. I know I'm moving a little bit faster than I normally would, just for the sake of time. So that one's going to need probably another coat. Yeah, Deborah, everybody wonders about the ceiling fan or the hair dryer. That is definitely a question that we get a lot. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna let that one sit for a minute and I'm gonna finish these gnomes up here real quick. That way, if you were working on these ones, we can finish this up for you. So if you want to rough up your gnomes, like this one's roughed up just a smidge. We use that fine grit paper around the edges just to kind of smooth everything out. Gives it a little definition. And then if your gnome is kind of pokey at the top, which this one was, just because this one was our not so lovely sample piece, you can kind of smooth that out a little bit. So there's one. Do the second one. A little bit of distressing on the top there. All right, we're gonna wipe off the dust. So now would be a good time if you are working on these ones, plug in your hot glue gun. We are getting ready for those next. And then you're gonna want a little bit of wax. Everything, as a rule of thumb, everything that has paint needs wax. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're going. If you painted it, you wanna wax it. The wax helps protect the colors from fading over time. It's gonna make that finish a little bit more durable. If you have little fingers like me, little friends with little fingers that are gonna come and pull all your ornaments off your tree with their sticky fingers, that's gonna help with that. Keep an eye when you're waxing too with red. That way you don't transfer the red dust or the red dye onto other projects. You're just gonna wanna use a clean part of your rag for that. And then if you're feeling like maybe you're using too much wax, you just wanna make sure that it feels nice and smooth. Sometimes people can use too much wax. One thing that you can do if you wanna make your wax go a little bit farther is put it on a microwave safe plate, a little dollop on there, and heat it up for like just a few seconds. Like I wouldn't think more than 10 seconds. And it's gonna really kind of not melt that down, but soften it up a little bit. So it's almost more like an oil, and it'll be a little bit easier to brush on for you. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna get these beards on here. I'm gonna, again, give us a clean piece, just because I don't want to get any of that paint in our beards. No paint in our beards. So we're gonna do white because our other one's gray. So let's do a white one. So in your bag, you're just gonna have some pieces, different pieces of fur in there. This one looks a little bit better. So what happens when we cut these apart is it's gonna have some kind of frayed edges at the top. That's okay. What we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of separate out anything that's loose, and I'm gonna show you how I used that to make almost like a mustache for our gnome. You'll see on this one, he's got some pieces that are kind of going off to the side. I've seen people use it above the nose so that it looks kind of like eyebrows. You can do that too. But just know that if you have things that are kind of sticking off, go ahead and pull those off. That's okay if those are kind of hanging off. So this is gonna be another spot where you're probably gonna want some scissors, just because we don't want too much of this netting that's holding everything together. We don't want this kind of hanging over the edges of our shape here. So I'm gonna trim this side up just a little bit. And kind of right across the top. And then we're gonna use these loose bits to come back in and kind of cover that up. So the first thing we're gonna do with our main part of our beard is we're gonna put some hot glue on the back. And you can always trim off as much of this as you need. So I'm gonna see how this looks to start. Pretty good so far. So if you do like the white line on there for the Santa hat, ooh, that's what I was gonna do at the top. A little bit of white, I can still go in and do that. Just make sure that this kind of goes right up where that line's gonna be. And then just look for anything that's still a little bit loose. We wanna make sure that all of that gets down really well. Ooh. Give them a little grooming. Grooming that beard up. All right. I got a little glue in here. I'm gonna cut that part out. So we're just gonna kind of comb him out a little bit. We're gonna fluff him so that it's kind of going across these edges here. And then if you're feeling like this is too long, you can always trim some of that back off too. All right, so I'm gonna take just like a little clump of this hair here and kind of do a dollop of glue at the top to kind of connect it together. I'm gonna use, you can use either like a toothpick or even a little pencil. Kind of put this together, and then we're just gonna take this and kind of push it down right on the top here, almost so it's like sticking out to the side. You might end up having to do a little bit more glue. And then afterwards, we're gonna come in with the little ball, the wood ball, and we're gonna put the nose right on top of there. That way it looks like this is kind of sticking right underneath it. And this is also helping to cover up kind of that netting, that line where we glued the beard down at first. Another little chunk. Little dollop of glue. Connect these up a little bit. Press them down on this side. You might find it easier to put the glue down on the wood piece first than to put them on the actual little pieces of the beard, whatever works best for you. I'm gonna do just a smidge of wax on this just because it feels a little not so smooth. I'm gonna brighten this color up a little bit too. All right, so then this part, I did not paint 100% the back of it. That way, I can do a little bit of glue on here. Wouldn't have to put wax on there either. Just kind of leave that unfinished. Stop it right now, look at this. Oh, that's cute. Super cute. Love it. Grinchy little gnome. And then if you're thinking, because we had some people say that they were going to do these like as shelf sitters, or if you're wanting to hang it, use a piece of twine or really anything. You could use ribbon on these ones too. Flip it over, little dollop of glue up here at the top. My glue stick is like brand new, fresh, and wanted to stick out. And then just kind of stick your twine right in there. Let that dry on there. There we go. Just trying to press that down in there without it popping off too much. Come on. You're probably gonna need a lint roller after this project too, just from all these little beard hairs sticking on there. So just make sure that's on there pretty good. You might have to glue it more than one time. Again, if you're just gonna pop them on a shelf, they don't even need anything on the back. There we go. Grinchy little gnome. All right, let's finish this guy up, and then we're gonna finish up that bar, and that'll be our last one. So this one, again, we're gonna trim off some of the edge here. We're gonna kind of pull off anything that feels loose. This one doesn't have as much. And the netting on this one isn't as noticeable. So we could even trim this down just a little bit. Yeah. Here we go. So we had as color options the white, which is this one, and then the Grinch green. Thanks, Shelly. And then the minky, it's like a minky gray, but it kind of fades out to white. That's the one on this sample one. I like that one. It's got some color variation to it. He's like a gnome that's going gray and white. He's very distinguished gnome. So I'm gonna come back in here and cut a little bit more of this off. So you can see on the bottom of mine, I've got a good bit of that netting still that's hanging off. So you could always come in and cut a little bit of that off. Just know you're gonna lose some of this bottom layer of fur down there. A little bit more glue here. Fan them out a bit. Okay. Same thing. This time I'll do the glue kind of right across there. It's hard when those little pieces, beard pieces, get stuck in there. Press that down in there. Pull this stuff off. Let's see if I got, here's a little extra fluff. Can always find some extra fluff on another piece. Push that one there. This one we did not paint a nose. We're just doing regular, unfinished nose. There we go. White bearded gnome. And then same thing, if you wanted to do the hook on the back or the hanger, you could do a little dab of glue at the top. He's got a good long beard. Long bearded gnome. Love it. All right. Easy peasy. Okay, so I think this one's ready to be removed. Oh yeah, that's looking good. Pull that right off of there. So this one's kind of naturally distressed looking just because that red is a little bit thin. If you're wanting it to be a little bit more distressed, these ones I think we did both grits of sandpaper. So this coarse grit, the one that feels rougher, is gonna take off more. It's gonna be good for around the edges. If you really wanna give it that rustic look. And then this one's gonna be better for going over the letters. Again, keep in mind, I know I mentioned this earlier, with the white and the red, the colors can kind of bleed a little bit. So you might notice like a pinky cast to it. A lot of times that'll come out when you're waxing it too. So do as much or as little sanding as you want, and then Look at the difference that that makes when you put the wax on it. Huge difference. So this white is not as solid as this one. That's why that color looks a little bit lighter or a little more like that brown tone, but it's kind of vintage distressed. So as many coats as you want to do. All right, and then the last thing we're gonna do, so mine already has a little hole from where we started the hook in the top. All you're gonna wanna do is take your eye hook and you're gonna push it pretty hard, kind of right in the center of the bar, right? Centered in there. Push it really, really hard, and then you're just gonna start turning it and twisting it in. You're gonna twist it all the way up until the threads are in. Just like that, okay? Now we're gonna do our twine through the top here. So you can do just a normal knot if you want. I like to do these little like loops. Just like that. We're gonna grab our ribbon and we're just gonna do one knot. Kind of keep this down over the hook. So if you have some thicker ribbon that you want to use, or even if you want to put multiple pieces on, you can. It's kind of the challenging part with these hooks. Some of the hooks are big, some of them are small. Just adds to the rustic. I'm sure you guys know all about our sagas of trying to get supplies for everything. So that's why everything's just a little bit different. 2020. There we go. Super cute. All right, so these are all ready to hang. So we started with the slice. We got these gnomes. We got our wood bars. Those are all ready to hang on our Christmas tree. All right. Looking good. Let me know if you have any questions about any of those ornaments. We are going to share this on our page, so if you didn't get to work on your ornaments tonight, you were just kind of checking it out, no worries. We're going to leave this video up so that you can access this at any time. And then we are going to put this on our website too, along with our other videos, so you can kind of check out a lot of the different projects that we have on there. We'll probably put it on our YouTube channel too. That way if it's easier for you to watch on YouTube, or like if you have a Roku or Apple TV or different things like that, you can stream it from YouTube right onto your TV. That way if you're working with other people, they can all see. So yeah, thanks for crafting with me tonight. I hope this was helpful as you guys are working on your projects. If you have any questions about any of these, just let me know. If you want to order one of these packs for yourself, just click on the link that's in the description of the video, or I also put it in one of the comments. We are going to be filling these orders all week long, and we do have some that we can start filling for those of you that ordered earlier this week. And then please be sure to, like, if you post pictures of what you make on Facebook, tag us. Facebook or Instagram, just do @theturquoisetophat, and we'll be able to see it. That way we can see what you guys come up with. We love seeing all the different things that people make because you guys are so creative. So, all right, if that's it, I'm going to go ahead and hop off, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend, and hopefully we will see you again soon. Thanks so much.